Managing cash flow. So we're still in the third section here of the course. We've received venture capital financing from two amazing venture capital firms, Kleiner Perkins as well as Sequoia. And now we're just going to talk about managing cash flow and forecasting. And first of all, we have to talk about how companies in general make budgets. How do they do it? How do they forecast for the next year or quarter? Well, it's actually not that hard to do, and it's a lot of fun. I actually enjoy the process. It's all based on one simple rule, and what I'm about to tell you is the most important thing I can tell you from a quantitative perspective in this whole course, and that's this. Forecasting is always based on a percent of sales. So what do I mean by that? Well, you forecast what your sales are going to be, or your top line, your revenue, and then everything else is just a percent of revenue. You make assumptions. It's actually very, very easy. Now, we all know that forecasts are never 100% accurate, but it's actually pretty straightforward. But I want you to see the forest from the trees. Again, you forecast sales, and then the rest of the model is very easy, again, because everything is just a percent of revenue. Now, public companies tend to forecast quarterly, and startups forecast monthly. Why? Because survival is the goal for startups, right? Most companies go belly up. Survival is the goal. So all successful entities have budget forecasts. Even the U.S. government does. There's a great movie called Dave where the president of the United States is setting a new budget. It's very entertaining. Check it out if you can. But the process he goes through in that movie to set up the budget is very similar to the way big companies and small companies do so. Now, when you forecast, you have to take into account seasonality. Okay, so a lot of companies have their business pick up towards the end of the calendar year as there's a big holiday rush to buy presents. And you have to always know when your year ends. And there's something called a fiscal year. And so most companies have a calendar year, meaning that their last quarter, the fourth quarter, ends in December. Okay, but some companies actually have fiscal years that end during different months. And I know it sounds very strange. So retail companies, for example, they tend to have their fiscal year ending in January, meaning the fourth quarter for them ends in January. Why? Because they want to account for holiday shopping and returns after the holiday as well. And so a lot of retail stores will have these Black Friday events, which is, I think, the last Friday in November in the United States, where there'll be a lot of deals. And it's right after American Thanksgiving, and people line up around the block all night long, and they get to buy stuff from stores very cheap for a very low price. And this is called Black Friday because most retail companies in the United States are in the red for the whole year, meaning they're losing money, until Black Friday when they break even. They're in the black. Okay? And so retail companies have their fiscal years ending usually in January. Now, different countries have different fiscal year ending periods. For example, in Japan, they don't have a calendar year accounting process. Rather, the fourth quarter for Japanese companies is January, February, March. So Japanese companies, for some reason, end in March. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about ethics. You might one day work with people that lie about financials. It actually happens a lot. It's awful. But I always want you to please be very conservative and honest with forecasts. It's really easy to make a clerical mistake or to overlook unethical people that you might be working with. And one little unethical mistake when it comes to forecasting can lead to jail time. I know it sounds unfair, but there are companies out there that have quarterly numbers, and they have to make those quarterly targets or Wall Street punishes their stock. And some companies will actually pull revenue in from the next quarter into the current quarter, meaning each quarter, instead of having 90 days, has 95 or 96 days, which obviously it doesn't. And they break the law. And a lot of these people go to jail. So just be really careful when you're forecasting and when you're working with others that forecast as well. So how long can we measure, or how can we measure how long it takes for assets and liabilities to actually turn into cash? Well, that's something called the cash conversion period ratio, right? So I'll give you an example, okay? And remember I said before to understand finance, don't memorize it. So here's an example. If we have $5,000 of inventory, right, our banana watches, we have $5,000 worth, and the average daily cost of goods sold for our banana watches is $100, then that means we have 50 days worth of cost of goods sold in inventory. Okay, so another way to think about this is if we put another $1 into inventory, it won't be converted into cash or cost of goods sold for another 50 days. Okay, so inventory issues can absolutely destroy a company. And so for our banana watch company, remember we had the recall last class, that might put us out of business. So producing too much stuff in inventory is a big mistake. And the Japanese kind of perfected this process back in the 80s called a just-in-time, or JIT, where they only produce stuff the second you need it. In fact, the books that I sell on Amazon, this is an amazing process. Check this out. I sell several books on Amazon.com. And if you order the book today, it hasn't been printed yet. It gets printed, and then you receive it 1.5 to 2 days later. That's just-in-time inventory management, and it is brilliant, as is Amazon. Okay, another ratio is the inventory to sale conversion period. And that's basically average inventories divided by cost of goods sold divided by 365. And that's to kind of measure on a yearly basis. If you want to measure on a quarterly basis, of course, you'd use 90 days instead of 365. Understand this, don't memorize it. And if it's not useful to you, then just forget about it. Okay, so if we sell our product on credit, right, meaning we don't get cash, somebody pays with a credit card, can we track how long it takes for us to collect the cash? We sure can. It's called the sale to cash conversion period, and you basically take average receivables divided by sales divided by 365. Okay, great. It's actually good practice, like I mentioned before, to pay your bills as late as you can without upsetting your business partners or incurring late fees. And there's a way to measure this. And that way is as follows. It's called the purchase to payment conversion period. And it's average payables plus average accrued liabilities divided by cost of goods sold divided by 365. Okay? All right, so short-term forecasting is primarily about cash flow estimates, and many assumptions are made, and many assumptions are based on sales, right? So forecast sales first, and then everything else is just a percent of sales going forward. And we also talked about cash conversion ratios in terms of the number of days it takes us to convert sales into cash. So this was a lot to handle in a very short chapter. Okay, if some of it was confusing, don't worry about it, because I'm going to show you a real-world example, 2 examples actually, later on in terms of making up forecasts for a private company and a public company. I think you'll enjoy that process. Thank you.